back to school planning. Looks like we have hit 1 minute after, so let's go ahead and jump in. Before we get into it, excited to introduce the team. My name is Jonathan Generous. I'm Director of Sales with ShopperTrack Analytics, part of Sensormatic, but a retailer at heart. I started in retail sales as a teenager, moved into store management, multi-store management, and have had the privilege of working with our clients for the last 11 years in a few different roles. Really excited to be with you today and excited to introduce Bliss. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Bliss Gordon from Storeforce. Not unlike Jonathan, I've spent my entire career in retail before coming to Storeforce, where indeed I've worn a few different hats, both on the product side, the success side, and on the sales side. And looking forward to the conversation we have today with the illustrious Billy Bennett.
Oh, well, thank you, Bliss. Good afternoon, everyone. Excited to be here. I'm Billy Bennett. I work for Journeys. I've been with the company for going on 25 years here pretty soon. First half of it was actually in our stores in the field, and the last half of it has been here in the office. I run our analytics team, and we work with our field teams and really support them in budgeting, forecasting, and scheduling. And I've had the pleasure of working with both of these guys actually for a decade or more, or at least known them that long. So excited to be here and talk about back to school.
Thanks, Billy. We're excited to have you here. Before we jump into the agenda and get started, a couple of quick housekeeping items. We'd love for you to engage throughout. The best way to do so will be utilizing the Q&A option at the top of your screen. So if you click that, you'll be able to submit any questions. And we have a section toward the end of this presentation where we'll jump into those and coordinate between the hosts. Additionally, there will be polls throughout, and those will pop up in prompt right away. We're going to do a test one right now just to make sure it's working. So Audrey, I'll let you prompt that. And the way that it works, you'll just select the answer that most resonates with your belief and then hit submit, and that'll automatically push it through. Go ahead and do that. I see they're popping up in the chat, so you can see the results there. Perfect. Everybody knows how to use a poll. Very good. All right, so today we're excited to talk about how we can use, from an agenda perspective, how we'll leverage traffic data to really understand what opportunities we have during back to school. How does that traffic vary by region? Billy will walk through and share kind of Journey's blueprint and how they've been able to successfully exceed targets over the last few years. And then lastly, Bliss will walk us through the importance of aligning your labor with that peak traffic opportunity to ensure maximum efficiency and really create a consistent experience for all of your guests. You might be thinking, we just got back from spring break. Why are we talking about back to school already? And so to get into it, one of the first polls we're going to do is thinking about how does back to school compare to holiday? And so if you can select which of the 4 categories you think has in-store traffic that's closest to holidays peak traffic from the 4 that you see listed. Let you go ahead and select those answers and submit. All right, we see children's apparel taking the lead, footwear in second, followed by family apparel, wireless. Interesting. What we actually see is, and why it's so important to have this meeting in April and start to think about how we get ready for back to school, is 74% of your customers shop in store during back to school period. And the traffic is the second biggest volume period outside of holiday. You can see that actually wireless sees the closest to holiday with 95 to 105% of their holiday traffic occurring during the back to school period, followed by footwear, 85 to 90% of their holiday peak they also see during back to school, and then children's apparel at 75 to 85%, and lastly, family apparel with 65 to 70%. So a huge volume increase during the back to school window when you compare it to that holiday period from kind of mid-November through early January. And not only is the volume significant during this window, but it's more challenging to deliver for your customers than holiday. If you think about traditional holiday, the whole country is really following a very similar trend, starting around the Black Friday weekend, a little bit of a dip, and then really the steady ramp all the way through Christmas and beyond. Whereas back to school has a lot of regional nuance, makes it a little more challenging to plan for. And what we're going to look at is how that falls against the 4 main regions. On this next slide, what you're looking at is the 4 major census regions in the US. So you have on the left-hand side, the graphs are plotting from NRF week 22 to 32. We have the West and South on the left, and then the Northeast and Midwest on the right. And you can see just at a far glance, looking at 22, 23, and 24, significant variation across those 4 regions of when we actually see the main peak, which changes how you plan for your stores in each of these 4 regions. The West and the South on the left, you can see are very closely aligned. Both of those areas tend to go back to school at the same time. There is some nuance in different tax holidays that tend to take place in the South and don't necessarily follow in the other regions. But considering that, and then you kind of get into Midwest follows behind that, and Northeast really being the laggard. The good news is, because 24 you can see is a little bit different than what we saw in 22 and 23, which really was around where Labor Day fell from a calendar position. This year in 25, we're going to see Labor Day in a very similar position to 24. So we expect that the peaks in these regions will be weeks 26 and 27 in both the West and the South, followed by weeks 27 and 28 in the Midwest. And then lastly, weeks 29 and 30 in the Northeast. Now, we're still 4 months out. If you've worked with forecasting and those sorts of things, we're going to continue to tighten these up. And so we'll talk a bit at the end around some follow-up items that we'll have in the June timeframe that'll paint a little more color once we get closer to the actual back to school holiday. But at this point, these weeks we do anticipate to be the top. The other thing that makes back to school a little bit challenging to plan is not only do we see these regional differences, but from a category perspective, not all categories follow the same trend. So what you're looking at here is the same, obviously, 4 regions. Instead of graphing 22 through 24, you're looking at children's apparel in blue, family apparel in orange, footwear in green, and then wireless in red. So wireless here you can see is actually the most consistent, really doesn't have a major peak. And that's why, going back to that initial 95 to 105% of traffic, a little bit of a misnomer because their business is very consistent throughout the entire year. And that's why you see that. Their main peak is actually end of September into October around the iPhone launch, which means it's going to be great to hear from Billy because footwear is the category that has the biggest back to school impact from a traffic perspective. And you can see that both footwear and children's apparel in the blue, regardless of which 4 regions you're looking at, follow a very similar trajectory, a very significant ramp, and then a generally the same decline. The only major exception to that is in the Northeast, where footwear tends to come off a little bit faster than what we see in children's apparel. And then family apparel, still a peak, but not as significant in those 2 weeks as what we see in footwear and children's. And these category differences, along with the regional differences we looked at before, really highlight the importance of equipping your field leadership with understanding their individual stores, because the local experience is a huge driver of success during this window. To do that, on the next slide, we're looking at power hours and how your teams can dig into that 2-week period within their stores to really identify which days and which hours within those days mean the most for their business. What you're looking at in the report is each day of the week during a store's key week in back to school, from Sunday to Saturday, and then on the top, the starting hours of the day through close. Everything highlighted in that dark blue window are the peak or the highest traffic windows within their business. And you can see that represented each hour by the percent of the total week's traffic. And Saturday, as an example, in the store, they're seeing almost 15% of the entire week's traffic from 1 to 6 p.m. Saturday. So really highlighting a key opportunity. You can see the star or shopper to associate ratio, which represents the total number of customers to each of those associates, jumps into the 20s, sometimes in the 30s. And I know from being in the store, and I'm sure you would agree, even your best are going to struggle to create a consistent environment and not feel a little bit hectic in that side and that type of environment, which Bliss will talk about from a scheduling perspective shortly. Once your team has this information, they know it, communicating it is kind of the next most important thing, making sure not only the store leadership knows, but their associates are aware of what it means, how sales behavior changes based on peak hours, and also looking at knowing your team, which associates make the most sense when we are, in a double-digit star environment versus maybe someone who's really good at building a high ticket sale but struggles to help multiple guests, or more of a marathoner where we put them maybe, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Still a very important part of the team, but making sure that those sprinters, the people who are going to be able to bounce from customer to customer, are in those key windows. And then lastly, using real-time information to really recognize performance and drive the excitement during the time. Being able to see if Billy's in store and we're working together and he's using breakaway statements to work with multiple guests, taking the time in the moment to say, hey, we were able to grow conversion by X. That was awesome. I saw you, help those 3 people and we were able to close 2 of the 3 as an example. It's just a great way to keep the energy up and to keep people focused on serving your customers, connecting and engaging with them. So I'm excited to build on best practices and hear some real life ones. Billy, I'll hand it over to you to do that.
Thanks, Jonathan. Appreciate that. That last slide gives me anxiety. It probably gives several of you anxiety, which is why we're on the call today. I'll start with a little bit about Journeys. Like I said, I've been here for over 2 decades. We are a multi-branded, style-led teen footwear retailer. So really for us, even though the footwear category is very important for back to school, it's significantly important for us based on our target customer and our target consumer. We are mall-based, so also trying to just draft off of good co-tenants, busy holiday days at the mall and do the best that we can with that. And most of our stores are a small box. So staffing is really of the utmost importance to make sure that we can get to everyone. Here in the picture, this is, if you're not familiar, this is a picture of one of our new 4.0 locations, which is our updated version of Journeys. Should be recognizable to the longtime Journeys customers, but much more modern for new customers and those that have been with us for a long time. So we really have tried over the last 10 years to take the data that starting with our relationship with Sensormatic, the traffic data that we were getting and the incredible amount of opportunity that we saw at back to school, and trying to, even in some years, manually kind of get our staffing fits right. And then through our relationship with Storeforce, we've been able to build on that by having tools to see visibility down to every single store and try to get these fits really, really honed in. And where that was super important last year, we had a tough beginning of the year, and everyone in leadership here knew that we had to go into back to school at our best. So in my role, I really wanted to look at how we could staff and forecast back to school better than ever and turbocharge the back half of our year. So we had a very successful back to school season. I won't wait on suspense for that. I'll talk through how I think we made an impact on that. But we ended up with 11% comp increase for Q3, and our Q2 increase was really all driven by July. We went into July with negative comps and had a really, really great July that we carried into through August. And what was so important about that was if you look back at the slide Jonathan showed with the different areas of the country going back at different times, it's not just that they're all going back at different times. It changes year to year. If you go back, I think you had 2022, 23, 24 listed, and it wasn't even stagnant per market. So I really went about last year trying to figure out how we could dial in to the back to school date as best that we could with the tools that we have available to us and a decade worth of history that we have with our traffic. So the first place that it started was understanding for my team and our field leaders what we were trying to accomplish. Anyone on this call who's a merchant, if you get the week right for back to school, you're earlier than that, like you're fine, right? So you need to know when the kids are going back to school, make sure you get your product into the store ahead of their two most important weeks and you're good to go. But really from a scheduling standpoint, the importance of getting the day right as close as we could in every store, it adds up to thousands of dollars per store. If kids in a market went back on Tuesday last year and it's going to be Wednesday this year, you have one extra day of maximized selling. And not only do you leave sales on the table, but you can get your store teams run over not being prepared for that. So we really started holistically with the merchant team and just kind of took a look at all of the dates that they had and then all of our LY dates. And if we can go to the next slide. So we then, and started in May, which is why this call is happening in April. In May, we started going through and working with going through school websites, but also working with our field leaders and just dialing in the back to school date, starting with our top volume stores, but really working our way through entire markets. One of the things that's been really important to me in my career is I recall how much harder for me selling shoes was during back to school as compared to Christmas. At Christmas, you get easy sales. People are buying gifts. And if you have the product they're looking for, you get it out, you show them some other stuff, but ultimately you're bringing them to the register. And there are no easy sales during back to school for anyone who's worked in stores. And if you're helping someone for a back to school item, even if they're shopping for themselves or college student, or especially if mom and dad are there and they want to ensure that the shoes fit, that there's room to grow. So you're probably trying on multiple pairs of shoes, not just the one. And then also ensuring that it's the style that their child and or the teenager is comfortable with. So it's really high touch and the customer expectations are higher. And so to excel, your star and your TPLH is super important because you're going to rely on your team to be able to get a pretty immersive level of service. And that's something we try to do at Journeys anyway, but that's beginning to end of the season. So if you've got a 2-week period or a 3-week period of time that is peak for back to school, it's really about hitting every single one of those days. Whereas at Christmas, like I said, you get to December 20th, I mean, you might not have anyone try on shoes for a while. They're there for a gift. They're trying to get in and out of the mall. And not to say that the staffing doesn't matter, but if you're seeing 90% of that traffic and everyone's trying on in this bucket and less people are trying on in the other, it really is actually more traffic from a service need level. So we had my team work through those dates, map it out. And really the big change that we did last year was having one-on-one calls with each one of our field leaders, review the dates, review their budgeting expectations and needs, the stores that we were, had remodels in that we wanted to make sure were maybe over taken care of, and then some of our other key market stores that are going to have the most amount of traffic come in. So no detail, I think, is unimportant during back to school. Like I said, if you have a date moved by one day, that could make or break whether that store comps their full season. Because if you shift over a day and they leave some of that money on the table, what looked like a winning comp could actually turn into a loss. So that was really a key to our success. The tools that we have available to us are what make it possible. Pre-COVID, we had just started our partnership with Storeforce, and I think we got a year and then one comp year, and then we hit COVID. So for any of you planners on the call, you know that COVID created probably 3 years of data that's not really relevant for going forward. So not using that as an excuse, what we've really strived to do is say, okay, well, that's fully in the rear view now. How do we take the last several years of data that we have and get our schedules dialed in? And then with Storeforce, allowing us to use some of the tools that Bliss is going to talk about to ensure that we have like conversion driving schedules with the traffic and the power hours that we've been kind of mapping with Sensormatic for so many years. Bliss, I'll pass it to you to talk about some of those tools.
Well, I appreciate that, Billy. And really, for the audience, I'm going to touch on some things that both Jonathan and Billy have covered. And the first I would go to is that, Jonathan, that excellent sort of regional map that showed the different peakiness by region and the importance of getting the week right. And for all of you labor planners out there, you probably saw what I saw in that graph, right? The importance of mapping your sales forecast and then that supporting labor and landing in those right weeks. That process inside of Storeforce is something we call recommended coverage. It's where we would leverage Sensormatic data specific to the store, specific to the region, specific to the time of year, to build sort of the blueprint of how we would want to deploy our labor against those customer patterns. And you can see it on the screen here, and some of you will just know this to be true from your own analysis. But 50% of your traffic opportunity and 50% of your revenue is crossing the lease line in 20 open hours. So, it really rings true when I hear Billy talking about the importance of not just getting the week, but getting the day and getting the hour of day becomes mission critical for the schedule. And scheduling for us in a world where we're building a schedule against a customer pattern isn't simply, did we spend the budget? Did we not spend the budget? We use a metric that we call peak coverage to not only go beyond just, did we spend the right amount of hours? Did we build the right quality of schedule? And so if you think of that relatively short window where we have 20 open hours to drive 50% or more of our revenue, it shows you how nuanced that schedule has to be, right down to the half hour. One of the things that we also heard from Jonathan is the importance of those power hours. And I think those are directly analogous to the 2-hour blocks of time that we refer to as segments that make up our peak hours. And we make sure that not only do we have a way of measuring the schedule against those all-important hours to make sure that it's aligned, but we take that a step further and we make sure that the scheduling manager themselves is always aware of where those peaks are on the scheduling grid as well. Now, I think that's really the importance of taking those big trends from planning, making sure that you're landing a forecast in the right week and then building a labor plan that supports it. But then to Billy's point, taking that down a level to the day of week, an hour of day as we build out that schedule. And there's a number of things we've learned in our time working with Billy and the team at Journeys. And if you just go to the next slide, please. Looking at the opportunities to schedule to peak, some of the biggest culprits that I think hold stores back is inadvertently shifting labor off the peaks and off of weekends into the middle of the week. And that's something that we sort of saw across, and whether it's Journeys or our other specialty retail clients, those are tendencies that we see that really go across all different volumes of stores. But the key part here, and I've got to commend the Journeys team with a peak coverage score of nearly 80% over their entire fleet. But one of the things we've done with our data analysis of all of our specialty retail clients over the past 13 or so years is that for every 10% of retailers able to increase that peak hour score, they drive 4 to 6% more increase in swing. For anybody not familiar with that swing KPI, it's really just year over year sales minus year over year traffic. But what it tells you is when you are blessed with that busy traffic period, are your stores capitalizing on it? Are we driving more sales because of that opportunity, or are we simply selling more because we had more traffic? So I think swing is a really interesting metric to look at when you're thinking about where traffic supports the schedule and the importance of really driving that peak coverage. So the Journeys team doing an absolutely excellent job with peak coverage. And hey, the good news for all the operators out there is there's a little incremental improvements that can still be made. One of the things that I think becomes, and Jonathan and Billy both discussed this, the schedule ultimately is made up of people. It's made up of your associates. And a retail program that I think transcends all the specialty retailers I've worked with, and it goes by a bunch of different names, is the idea of a sales leader. Somebody that is quarterbacking that sales floor, that is deploying or redeploying the rest of the associates based on those traffic patterns, based on the activities that are emerging in the store. And again, we refer to that as a sales leader. But when we think about the right place and right time, when I'm talking about a sales leader, I'm talking about the right person. The person that can quarterback the sales floor, that can recognize the selling behaviors that they want to see in the rest of the associates during the peak, where it might be really me concentrating on selling to as many customers as possible. And that same sales leader is coaching people in the trough to make sure that they're spending as much time in building as big a basket as they possibly can. In a store force schedule, that sales leader is a very special selling activity. And it's a selling activity that within store force, we analyze and look at very closely. So closely, in fact, that we can tell all of our customers who their top sales leaders are by store. We can measure how often the store hits its targets when Jonathan is working as opposed to Bliss is working. And we can share all of those KPIs, average transaction value, conversion, visit value, to support with hard data who is the most successful sales leader and who gets the benefit of some additional coaching. Billy, I know when we talked earlier, this is something that the Journeys team has started to lean into. Can you tell me a little bit more about your experience with the sales leader program?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had the sales leadership turned on in store force for beginning of last year, and kind of folding it into our culture was, and truly actually getting an understanding of how we have it fit with what we do. Was kind of where we were at last year, and it can be called many things, like you said. Floor general is probably what we called it forever, while not measuring it though. And it wasn't an activity on the schedule. It was just like, something that would be in our training content. Make sure you're being a floor general during our busiest times, during your power hours. And this tool really gives us the opportunity to see who was assigned that sales leadership, and then have coaching and career conversations, frankly, based off of it. We're getting a measurement of how effective employees are when they have that 2-hour sales leadership. And so it's really helping us figure out which sales leads we have that are ready for the next role, because they're already showing it. Which co-managers we have that are ready for the next role, because we have data that shows it. And it's not just their sales, it's how they're kind of stewarding the team through some of these busier times. I will say that, with as happy as we are with last year's results, we're always looking for what we can do better. Sales leadership is something that we've gotten significantly more effective getting assigned and wrapped in for our employees in Q1 this year. And we've seen like probably a 22% jump in compliance on the schedule. So we really think that that's going to help us and have that momentum in play going into back to school to be able to beat these double-digit comps. And the peak coverage thing, to just note real quick, the 77 is great. It was a big improvement over the year before, but there's still a lot of room there. And that's kind of what I've challenged my team on too. Something I didn't note earlier, and we also don't have a blank check to spend either. And I don't want to make it seem like we do. Peak coverage is a very helpful tool where you're looking at a store, and if they're on their hours budget, excuse me, or on their if you're measuring budget by hours or dollars, if they're on budget and the higher that score is, that's the most effective use of the hours you've given them within budget, right? So we feel pretty confident that we can chase increases in that number by continuing to dial in not just the forecasting, but then working with the field on the execution of the schedules once they're out there, and then making sure that they're worked fully. And we know that we can drive that number up with not a significant amount more of spend. It's really more about just dialing in the hours where we need them to be, which is, that's the battle all of the time, but this gives us a level of visibility that we feel really, really confident about.
Yeah, and then the last thing I would just circle all the way back to is that peak coverage, that visibility, that transparency is the underlying thing that's driving all that, is that rich sensormatic data that's so granular that it's helping you predict where those customers are going to be so that you can get that alignment on your schedule. So appreciate you sharing that with us, Billy.
Yeah, and just to double click on that for sensormatic, one of the great things too is, again, we've been a partner for over a decade, and some of the time we're able to go back through whatever good data that we have and find, hey, the last time in this major market that they went back to school on a Wednesday, and use that as part of our forecasting. So it's not just last year. Through both tools, we're able to look at the rich data set that we have and figure out what fits best, for our teams out there.
Absolutely great. Thanks, Bliss. Another quick poll. Where do you think you're leaving money on the table? Go ahead and select your answers. Looks like the two that kind of go hand in hand, overstaffing during low traffic and understaffing during key. I think that's probably the most relatable.
I'm watching it and just going yes and yes.
Yeah. Yes. Awesome. Well, thanks, Billy and Bliss for the context that you shared, Billy, the ways that your team are thinking about it and preparing, and thank you to everyone who's joined. We'll get into Q&A. So any questions that you have, go ahead and submit those. Looks like they're coming. So the first one, traffic patterns can help with optimizing staffing for front-end day stocking, customer service associates. How can we plan ahead for staff at an hourly grain so the demand is properly met? Are there other techniques than just forecasting? Bliss, I think this one probably makes the most sense for you.
Yeah, I think so. And so where I think you're on the right track is thinking about traffic patterns and how granular we can get as retailers so that there's actually utility in getting down to that level of detail. within Storeforce, one of the things that we're doing is taking, as an example, Billy's hours labor target, and that customer curve that's being driven from that sensormatic data, and we're really overlaying them onto one another. So we're doing that for you. So in terms of other techniques or analysis, in that regard, we're sort of the easy button, right? You press that, we will disperse your hours budget based on that customer pattern. We'll do that down to the half hour. Half hour is probably most common among Storeforce clients. It's a good level of granularity to build a tight schedule off of. As Billy pointed out, no retailer is sitting on heaps of cash that they can just dump into labor. So getting down to the right level of detail, I think, is really important. But ultimately, it's mapping that labor against that customer curve down to the half hour to get you the most granular schedule that still makes sense from a dollars and cents perspective.
I'll jump in and add on too. This is something that the non-selling piece of it is not something I'm going to sit on this call and claim to do well yet. Again, as a small box retailer, specialty retailer, we rely on a lot of multitasking, but we also know that multitasking gets in the way of, serving the customer first, which is why that sales leadership activity is so important. However, one tool that we are finding useful as a company that doesn't have a lot of non-selling activities or drivers that add to the schedule, Storeforce creates the schedule based on the traffic demand, as Bliss discussed, and then also some of the labor laws and or Journey's rules around making a schedule. And within there, there's a statistic that's available capacity, which is at the bottom of the schedule. And that essentially shows the team in the store when, based on traffic, they probably have a person or two more than the traffic need will require. Maybe you have a really, a good hour at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and then 3 it dies down, and 4 o'clock it ramps back up. You're not going to split that shift up. You're probably going to have a 4 or 5 hour shift. And so having that shift in there might generate some natural available capacity. And what we're trying to get better at is kind of pointing our teams at those times on their schedule to do some of the heavier lifting, multitasking that they have to do.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Another one for you, Billy. The question is, Billy, it's 2025. What is the one labor management problem retailers should be focused on?
Oh, man. That's tough. I go to NRF and some of the trade shows and all that stuff, and I know that technology, in a CFO's office, technology is like, how do I, lower labor and raise sales and some of the ways that they want to make our stores more efficient, which certainly has its place with us. That being said, our DNA as a company is to give the customers an experience that they'll want to come back for, right? The help they get from a person is the point, right? We carry brands that most of our brands have their own stores even, right? So from a labor management perspective, for me, it's really just, it kind of goes to the poll question. How do I do the right things during the low periods of time? And maybe think outside the box, right? Like, if I don't want a technology to replace people, then maybe I have to look at some of our, not labor laws, we can't change those, but maybe some of our rules around schedule making, and be more flexible so that I can meet that lower demand and not be overstaffed when there's not an upside. Because I'm in this job to play offense. I tell everyone in our stores, my job is to help them sell more shoes. I don't always get to do it in a way that's popular for them, but really getting these fits in place and maximizing the best hours and minimizing overspend during the less impactful hours is top of mind for me more than ever as we compete with that technology component.
Absolutely. There's no shortage of things to focus on. So it's hard to pick one. Bliss, I think this one is for you. I'm using another workforce tool to create schedules now. What would you say makes Storeforce different?
For sure, our differentiator is that we are laser focused on specialty retail. That means that retail programs that the specialty retailers on this call are already familiar with. We talked about one of them in sales leadership, but things like identifying missed opportunities, opportunities at peak, like that's in the DNA of our software. And because we only focus on specialty retail, it's programs like that and building data and analysis around those programs to drive more effective schedules, more effective in-store time with your associates that quite frankly can't port over to another industry. There is no such thing as a sales leader in a manufacturing environment or even in a retailer like a grocer. But they exist in specialty retail, and those programs are part of the DNA of Storeforce. And I don't know that there's another retailer out there that can say that with our conviction.
Thanks for sharing. Billy, I think this one's for you too. For stores that already have a pretty high conversion rate, how do traffic patterns help with conversion, or is there a ceiling?
That's a great question. I don't think that there is a ceiling. We found our star and traffic fits to be, it's not quite like a fingerprint because it's not like every single one's unique, but I think knowing your store factors, what plays into that high conversion, we have a handful of power center locations, off-mall locations that naturally convert higher. However, our best conversion store 2 years ago in the whole company had the second best conversion increase in the whole company last year. So like, I do think that there's something to being able to raise the bar. There might be, a range or a number that would be hard to get to and stay at forever. But it's all of the factors, buying the right product and all that stuff. But from a labor perspective, the way that we've been able to dial that in is truly with peak coverage. Even a lower traffic store, that statistic still applies to them, is that most of their business comes into 20 hours. 50% of their business comes in the 20 hours that are most important to them. And so some of that could go down to ensuring not just that the schedule's right during those 20 hours, but that the exact right people are there during the 20 hours. Your best employees that have the best metrics, however you measure that success. That's how we've been able to really kind of push the envelope there. There's certainly something to be said for stores existing in like a bucket, again, based on their characteristics, but I've not seen any evidence that, some of our best stores can't reach a point or 2 or 3 higher.
Awesome. All right, this one I believe is for me. As a longtime ShopperTrack customer, how do you see traffic counting conversion metrics changing in the near term? This is a tough one. I think where I'm excited to say we're going is with the technology capabilities that are advancing. So, a long time over the last few years, I think several people have tried to solve for how long are people staying in stores? How do we exclude employees and really get to unique visitors? And we're finally at a point where technology-wise, we have a new device coming to market that will leverage a re-ID capability, enabling completely privacy compliant with GDPR and California privacy compliant ways of tracking individuals throughout their time in store. So understanding, excluding the employee, understanding if I came in at 10 o'clock this morning and then I said I want to think about it and I come back at 2, it being able to re-identify that it's my second time in the store and getting into what is the actual unique number of customers who have visited the location and how does that translate from a true conversion perspective where the opportunities exist. that is the future, in my opinion, of where traffic and conversion is going. It's been something I think a lot of people have been trying to solve for the last several years, and it's been a little challenging. People have tried there's wearable exclusion technologies and things like that, but then you bring into the compliance component of getting your teams to use it. And thankfully, AI is at a place where we're able to do that while still respecting the customer privacy. So I think that'll be the next big advancement. All right, we have another one. Can you explain the TPLH metric and how does it help improve customer service? Billy, maybe you can.
Yeah, it is the ratio of employees you have working for a given time versus the amount of customer that they'll be helping within that time. So we refer to it as STAR in all of our systems, which is shopper to associate ratio. TPLH is total. I always forget, Bliss, you got this one. It's total people per labor hour, I think. So anyway, they're both the same thing. And so if the number was 20, that means that an associate working, if there was one person working, simply they had to help 20 customers per that labor hour. And so what I've found with STAR is the less people working, the more sharply a high number is felt, okay? So if your STAR is 20 and you're by yourself, that probably doesn't feel great. If your STAR is 30 and you're by yourself, that does not feel great. If your STAR is 25 and there's 3 people working, there is some teamwork that can come into combating that, right? So there's another question in the chat. I'll jump in the Q&A that I'll jump into is like, what's the right number? We will generally, for us, it's a range. There's not an exact right number. Store footprint is certainly part of it. For us, I generally like to be like the group. I want somewhere between like 14 and 22. That's what works for us. I have some stores that run very, very well at 25, but the key for them is when we started counting traffic, they were at 42. So, we've done some work to get the number down. But you also have to look at what's productive. You can't just drive your number down without the sales to back it up. So there's not a right answer. Your productivity and your sales per hour, your transactions per hour are going to tell you when you've leveraged too low and or when you're leaving money on the table. You'll see that in your conversion as well. So I would say in your organization, looking at your data and finding a range, work with actually people, great people from both of these companies that I'm sharing the stage with today that will help you kind of figure out where those key areas are for you. But unless every single one of your stores is exactly the same front and back, there's not really going to be one number that's exactly right. There will be a range.
Yeah, and
Thanks for getting. Sorry. Go ahead, Bliss.
Sorry, John. If I was just to add to what Billy said, STAR or traffic per labor hour, again, same thing. I think of those as sort of a Goldilocks KPI, right? Can't be too hot, can't be too cold. Yep. And as somebody who thinks deep thoughts about schedules, I like to see STAR on a schedule dashboard because it instantly gives me an idea of the service levels I'm seeing in that business. And to Billy's point, it's not a one-size-fits-all metric, but keeping it in a range really gives you some very quick insights into what's going on inside that business. I think it was a great question.
Yeah, the Goldilocks analogy is perfect because the way I've tried to teach our field about it is too hot, immediately, right? Like you can look at it and you're like, that was awful, we lost sales. There are numbers that are just so high and you just know we didn't get to every customer. Too low is a little bit more controversial, but that's for a labor planner's job to manage, right? And know what you can afford. And, because we want to give the best customer experience we can, but also, again, we have to put out there what's right for the business. And so there is definitely a sweet spot range that you'll find more effective. And that actually, back to school and Christmas are the greatest example of that. You have to think about what your employees are being asked to do during the time of year. I can run a 24 STAR on December 23rd in a given store and like nobody tried on shoes, and it's probably more than fine. 24-star for a main back to school day for us would be pretty terrible. It would be a bad experience for some customers and for our staff. They would get overrun a little bit.
Yep, it's a great perspective. And it answered the next question, which was, what is the sweet spot for TPLH? So you saw it coming and you already answered it, which is
number one question I get at all of our sales meetings. So
the last question we have in here is, can you share back to school forecasts and key learnings? Which probably prompts, Audrey, I think we can head toward some of the next steps. So from a back to school forecast perspective, we will be building out a full campaign. Like I mentioned, from a forecast standpoint, we want to get a bit closer to the time period to tighten up some of those models. With this year's information and heading into that, the closer we get, the more accurate those will be. So more of that coming end of June and into July. And then we also have an exciting event Bliss does in New York. Bliss, I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the second time we've done this, first time in 2025. But the Storeforce Roadshow is Storeforce and some of our excellent specialty retail clients taking a sort of an intimate setting to be able to answer questions, mix and mingle with your industry peers, and let us talk a little bit more about some of the things that our retail partners are being challenged with and how they're addressing them. So really looking forward to the roadshow in New York City.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate everybody joining. Billy, thank you so much for being willing to share a little bit behind the curtain of how you guys have been so successful last year and in years before. We're rooting for you this year as well, and hope all the planning goes well. Bliss, thank you for all the insight you shared on aligning the traffic and labor, and thanks to the whole crew of attendees who joined. We hope it was useful, and after today's meeting ends, you will get a recording automatically. And welcome any feedback through the link in the chat. And then lastly, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to the three of us. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, guys. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks.